Welcome to the Modern Athenas podcast with Sonia and Debbie. On this podcast, we will discuss how regular women become Athenas by working hard, persevering through the challenges in their lives, and contributing to a better world. This is podcast 7. Today, we're excited to have a guest with us to discuss her life experiences with modern Athenas and issues facing women today at home, at work, and in life. Our guest is Sarah Armstrong, a CFO, wife, and mother who lives outside of Philadelphia. She attended Villanova University and majored in accounting. She also has her NRA instructor license, which is pretty amazing. Sonia and I met Sarah through a leadership network we all became a part of in 2016. So Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Debbie and Sonia, thank you so very much for having me tonight, and I'm thrilled to be here with you and your listeners.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, and we really appreciate your willingness to be our first guest on Modern Athenas. So our podcast focuses on women who embody Athena's characteristics: her calm demeanor, wisdom, sense of justice, perseverance, and warrior spirit. We asked Sarah to come on and speak with us because she embodies many of Athena's traits and also has managed to be very successful at home, at work, with volunteerism, and with her hobbies. In short, she is what many women want. She has it all. So I think Sarah's got a great perspective on how you can have it all and still maintain balance. So I hope our listeners today will really enjoy Sarah's discussion. So let's get started.
Hi, Sarah. So you've told us that you grew up in a two-parent household. So we'd like to hear a little bit about your early childhood and your relationships with your parents. But you've told us your father was an FBI agent and your mother raised you. But it sounds like she then went to a law school and became an assistant district attorney, a county sheriff, and then was elected to the Court of Common Pleas in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. She sounds like a modern Athena, particularly her wisdom, and it sounds like she has a strong sense of justice. What was she like when you were growing up?
Well, I'll have to say I'm very fortunate to have a mother who embodies everything it does mean to be a modern Athena, and she's absolutely my role model and mentor. And honestly, I didn't realize how lucky I was until I was a young adult myself. Not everyone is as fortunate to have someone like her in their lives. And you're right, she did go to law school, and this was back when women didn't go to law school. When she was a young wife, a young adult with two small children, most career options were nurse or teacher, but she was inspired by her grandfather to go to law school. And like I said, so she was not only a woman in law school at a time that women didn't go to law school, she was a married woman with two small children, and certainly faced a lot of pressure just simply because of that situation. And she went to Penn Law School, and she was one of 6 women in a class of 600. And so she was breaking glass ceilings decades before the term even existed. So after she graduated from law school, she was an assistant district attorney here in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, which is just outside Philadelphia, for about 6 years. And then she was asked to run for our county sheriff position. So aside from being a female lawyer at a time, she's now 72, but being a female lawyer, being a female county sheriff was practically unheard of in our country's history, not just our county's history. But she was elected to be our sheriff. Delaware County has about 600,000 residents. This is a countywide elected position. She was our sheriff for about 6 years, and then she ran for the bench, which is the Court of Common Pleas, to be a judge. And she has served for close to 20 years on the bench. And she just has this magical combination of a hardworking German work ethic combined with this Midwestern common sense and an East Coast drive for success. And she grew up on a small farm in southern Illinois. She and my father met when he was a young FBI agent and assigned to an office in southern Illinois. They met there, got married, moved up to Chicago. My father was in the Chicago bureau for, I believe about 12 years. I was born outside Chicago, and then we were all transferred to Philadelphia. And my father ran the organized crime and narcotics division of the Philadelphia Bureau for many years. And so he started in the Marine Corps and the FBI, and those two jobs spanned 32 years. So I also have a unique childhood of growing up in a family with two parents in law enforcement, and that was really a special thing. And my mother is this incredibly just smart woman, and sometimes I have an opportunity to go see her in the courtroom, and that's always a lot of fun for me. And one day, one of her court officers said to me, your mother has this wonderful judicial temperament. And I mean, that was probably 10 years ago, and it still stuck with me because I thought, boy, that just describes her to a T. She's very calm. And I try to be more like her every day. She has a very impressive vocabulary, and she's more likely to dress you down in Latin than using a curse word. She's just a really interesting person. She enjoys sailing. She can do celestial navigation because she doesn't like to have to rely on a GPS, for instance. A few years ago, my father said, "What would you like for Christmas?" And she said, "Well, I'd really like to have you sign me up for a diesel engine repair class, because if we're out in the boat and the engine fails, I want to be able to repair it myself." So this might give you an image of a kind of a rough and tough woman, but she's a beautiful ladylike woman because that's how she was raised. And I didn't realize how fortunate and blessed I was until I realized that not everybody is that lucky.
Sarah, as you're describing your mom's experience in law school and sort of the type of woman she's become, I'm just sitting here thinking of my mom, who was also one of the few women in her law school at the University of San Francisco. And when she went for a job interview, for one of her first job interviews, the sort of head partner that was interviewing her said, "Well, we don't need any women. We already have our one woman. She works in the library."
Oh, sure. Yeah, you could be a law librarian. I guess that was an option, too, that was socially acceptable, right?
Yeah, so it's just so fascinating to me in what similar experiences they had, though across the country from each other and, a few years apart, versus what it's like today.
Oh, there's probably more women in law school today than men, or at a minimum, it's 50-50.
Yeah, and certainly, now, well, one could argue that there's still the good old boys network in a lot of law firms, but at least now women certainly have upward mobility, whereas before they didn't have any.
Oh, absolutely. I'm fortunate enough to know some female partners at various law firms, big, powerful law firms in Philadelphia. There's absolutely career paths for women in law today that didn't exist then. And, especially to run for public office as a female sheriff, or even she was not the first female judge in Delaware County, but, certainly one of the first, probably 4 or 5. So definitely breaking a lot of glass ceilings, and but did so with a professional and calm demeanor that I admire and try to replicate today myself.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it helps her on the bench. Maintaining that sort of calm demeanor and that just ability to sort of detach away from the emotional turmoil that may be happening in the courtroom to be able to really see the whole case and what's going on.
About a month ago, I went to visit her. I happened to have a work commitment near her courthouse. And so I said, "Hey, are you available for lunch?" She said, "Yes, but I have protection from abuse order court. So if I'm not in my chambers, come find me." So, okay, so I did that, and I sat in the back as she was signing emergency petition from abuse orders. And I watched 4 or 5 cases being presented in front of her. And I'll have to say, by the time I was done, I was practically in a flop sweat. And there she is, just asking questions, signing orders. And when we were walking to lunch, I said, "Mom, how do you not have secondary trauma?" She said, "Oh, that was nothing today. That was fairly tame court today." And I just have such admiration for people who are public servants who put themselves in really difficult situations physically, psychologically, and are able to power through it and detach from what they are seeing in front of them and are able to serve others. And that's a unique and special talent, and I admire people who can do that.
Yeah, well, I know that you've had a really interesting childhood and sort of growing up with your parents.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. My mother, I can almost not picture her in a seated position. I don't have many childhood memories of her sitting down. She's always working, always moving. For my mother, and especially tonight, since we're focusing on modern Athenas, my father was a fantastic father, and my parents have a lovely marriage, and I'm very close to my father as well. But for tonight, we'll focus on the modern Athenas. And so for my mother, I would say her parenting style was very hands-off. She expected me, and I have an older brother. She expected the two of us to do well in school and keep ourselves busy. And I would say that she was very much the opposite of what today people call a helicopter parent. I've heard her style referred to as lighthouse parenting, and that basically means that my brother and I were sent out to sea, and she was there to keep us from crashing into the rocks. And we were just expected to handle our daily business and figure things out. And you have to remember, this is all before cell phones, and kids didn't have cars, Uber didn't exist, right? So, by hook or by crook, you were just kind of figuring your day out. And that doesn't mean to say that she didn't love or care for us, but she's a strong German woman who's not particularly affectionate, but is a fantastic mother. And I'm so fortunate to have her, and fortunate to have her as a major player in my children's lives as their grandmother, and to be a role model for both of them. My son, actually, not that long ago, so my children are 22 and 20. My son, probably within the last 6 months, said to me, I don't remember the whole conversation, but he said, "Oh, Mom, I'd be much more disappointed or upset if I disappointed Grandma than if I disappointed you." And I thought, is that something that should bother me? And then I thought, no, for my children to understand that there are family and generational expectations is a good thing. So that's a lot about what my mom is like.
Sarah, she sounds like a rock. She sounds like a rock at the center of your family, and thank you for sharing that. I wanted to shift gears a little bit now to talk about you and your career. You've told us you're a certified public accountant and a chief financial officer. So when you were growing up, what did you aspire to be?
Well, I can't say that as a child I aspired to be a CPA and do tax returns and financial statements. And, the one thing that, remember when you're little and you say, I can't wait till I grow up and I can do anything I want. And no one says to you, darling, you're going to be buried in paperwork. Right? So
I wanted to be Jane Goodall when I was young.
Oh, see, right. And I thought that being a marine biologist would be cool because I could play with dolphins. So, you get the gorillas, I get the dolphins. You're an attorney, I'm a CPA. So beware of what you want.
Chimpanzees. They were chimpanzees.
Oh, there you go. Even better. So actually, when I was young, I was a serious competitive figure skater. So my early goals were to make the Olympic team. And so actually, I competed at a very high level. It's senior ladies, the highest level, and traveled quite a bit across the country. I went to high school part-time so that I could train, and that was a fantastic part of my childhood. And so that was really my childhood dream, and therefore I wasn't really thinking about career opportunities or, my mom's a lawyer. Do I want to be a lawyer? My dad's in the FBI. Do I want to work for the FBI? I wasn't even thinking about that even through high school. And so I graduated high school in 1987, the Winter Olympics that were in Alberta, Canada in the winter of 1988. And I went as far as I was going to go. I didn't make the Olympic team, which was a disappointment, of course, but certainly okay.
Can we just pause on that for a second? I mean, look, you were a renowned figure skater. I mean, I don't think that's something that most people, when they're in high school, get. That's incredible.
First of all, I went to our local Catholic high school, and we had a lot of students who did different things, right? So it wasn't all about the high school football team, et cetera. And part of the reason is the Catholic high school allowed me to not have to take gym, for instance. So if I'd gone to the public high school, I had to take a gym credit each year or something like that. Whereas they recognize, okay, if you're essentially working out for 6 hours a day, we think you got the gym thing covered. So there were a handful of students at my high school that kind of did unique things where I did correspondence courses actually through the University of Lincoln, Nebraska when I was in high school. So I kind of went to high school half day, and then I did correspondence half day. Like on the weekends, I would fill in that time so that I could skate the majority of the day. And it was fantastic, and I loved every minute of it. And it's fine that it didn't, quote, work out, because for all other intents and purposes, it did for me. The discipline, the, getting up early, the student athlete. So I was a good student because I knew that skating was a privilege, and that my parents weren't going to be interested in supporting that financially, emotionally, etc., if I wasn't committed to my schoolwork as well. So it's been a long time, though. It's funny. It feels like another life.
Yeah. And so after, your figure skating career almost ended, and, you went to Villanova and majored in accounting, then did you go into the CPA world sort of after college?
I did. So, didn't make the Olympic team, went to Villanova. And it's funny for anyone who has young, high school students who are applying to college. I basically didn't make the team. It probably wasn't a whole lot before college started in the fall. And I said to my parents, okay, I filled out the application for Villanova. Could I have a $25 check? And essentially mailed it in, never visiting, never thinking I wouldn't get accepted. It's so different now. But that's what I did, filled out the application, sent in $25, and had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. So, a little bit of an identity crisis as a freshman in college, but that's okay. That's not that uncommon, even if you didn't come from having some sort of serious sports commitment or an arts commitment. But I started in the liberal arts college at Villanova, and it was about 2 years in that the dean of the liberal arts school said to me, you really belong in the business school. And in retrospect, I'll have to say that was very generous of her, because I'm sure there's some sort of metrics that are kept within the different schools within the university as to enrollment. But she was genuinely looking out for my best interest and said, I really think you're a business person. So went to the business school at Villanova, graduated with a bachelor's of science in accounting. And I was also a resident assistant while I was at Villanova, my junior and senior year. And that's certainly a time when being a female actually was played a role in opportunities, because Villanova had boys' dorms and girls' dorms. And so they needed an equal number of RAs, boys, female and male. And so that was a wonderful experience at Villanova. And it also paid for room and board, because my family didn't have the type of resources to just waste that kind of opportunity. So after Villanova, I started in public accounting. I sat for the CPA exam. I passed the CPA exam, and it was off to the races. And it's been a 26-year career in finance since then.
Wow, that's amazing. So, we spoke a little bit about your mom and some of the challenges that, she faced going into law school, and then sort of her career path as a woman. And do you see any differences now in the world that you're in the CPA world, than, were sort of there when you first started out in the field, related to, being a woman and your career?
Absolutely. So as I said, I'm 26 years into my professional career. And to provide some context, when I started working, for instance, all women wore suits with skirts, right? No pantsuits in the office. People smoked in the office, right? It was a very different environment in general, not just for women, but across the board. And so things have certainly changed in my profession. And I would say for the better. I was not raised to embrace victimhood. My mother had every expectation that I would be successful in whichever field that I chose. And because of that, I never looked for any sort of discrimination in the workplace. And so I think that while a lot of those discussions about equality in the workplace are happening right now, and a lot of those are good for companies to be discussing their policies, I've always just let my work speak for itself. My work product is is a reflection of me. And so I think that that's the most important thing today for anyone in the workplace, female or male.
And do you ever get bothered with people saying, well, is it different to be a female rather than just saying your work is really good?
I can't say that that bothers me, mainly because it doesn't happen very often. It seems as though people are interested in my perspective as a CFO in a leadership position as a woman. But on a day-to-day basis, working, it's not something that comes up. The interesting thing is I am in a field, and I think that this is an important part of this discussion, is that my field is objective. It's essentially math. My work is, generally speaking, either correct or incorrect. It's in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, or it's not. And I think back to some of your earlier fantastic episodes about the women computers, and that they had the same situation. Their math was either correct or it was incorrect. So it's easy to let your work speak for itself. It's likely harder for women who are in professions that are subjective. If you're in the creative space, for instance, is this the best ad that you could be producing for the company, or is the one that the guy in the cubicle next door did? Well, that's subjective. And that's probably a little bit harder than working in a field that has very clear rules and parameters.
Yeah, so in this type of a field where there tends to be more right and wrong, do you see, men and women making up cohesive work teams, or, do you think that it's kind of a hindrance to creating good teams sometimes to have them be mixed gender? I know that, in some fields, like you were mentioning, like the creative fields, sometimes, there have been studies that single gender teams, work better, but I was just curious to hear, your thoughts.
Sure. I always think that diversity of thought helps make teams cohesive, assuming that they are sharing the same overall mission of the project. Men and women do approach projects and problems and opportunities differently, but I think that that's a benefit to have a diversity of thought, and a beautiful thing. And it illustrates why having men and women leaders and teams is so valuable in the workplace.
Yeah, I definitely think that men and women lead very differently.
Oh, I would agree. I definitely think that men and women lead differently.
Yeah, I don't know. Whenever I, see male and female leaders, I never want to say like, oh, this one's a good leader because she's female, and here are the 5 characteristics that make a female a good leader, versus here are the 5 characteristics that make a man a good leader. And I don't think that's true, but I think there's this just inherent quality that each has, that they have these sort of inherent traits about their leadership.
I would agree, and I think that, and this is a generalization, but I think men in leadership positions tend to take things more at face value, and women tend to dig down to an additional layer to problem solve. And I think that's especially the case when it comes to interpersonal matters. Women tend to look for the why in someone's behavior or their pattern of thinking. And to some extent, I think that women leaders have an advantage in the workplace. So if you have established yourself as a strong but fair leader and a person of empathy, people will come to you and seek your advice. And from that, you learn a lot about what's going on in your workplace. And that really comes over time by building trust with your coworkers. And actually, I have found that a lot of times men will come to talk to me about a problem in the workplace or their career because maybe they are embarrassed or intimidated to talk to another male leader in the organization.
Yeah, I've definitely encountered the same thing. And I think the trendy term now is to call it emotional intelligence. And that, it tends to be that women have a lot of emotional intelligence. But like you're saying, in those interpersonal moments, I even see it in teams, right? Women tend to be not more emotionally sensitive, but they tend to be more sensitized to emotions that are happening in the room because they use them as cues as to sort of that group dynamic. Whereas men tend to take, as you mentioned, comments on their face value, and they just kind of plow. And again, these are generalizations, but I think they hold true in a lot of cases.
I would agree. And I also think it's the type of thing that you learn over time. It does take a certain amount of experience in the workplace to be able to detach from a hostile or a highly emotionally charged situation and be able to say, I think there might be something else going on here. And I think that that's a trait that women tend to have in the workplace.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's a critical trait because sometimes, when you're in a room in the heat of the moment and everybody is not necessarily yelling at each other, but definitely putting their ideas on the table and are sort of drilled into their position and don't really want to move off of their position. I think that, being able to pull out a little bit and see the bigger picture or what the team's trying to do and not be necessarily a peacemaker, but be a facilitator. I think that that's a quality that a lot of good leaders that I've had in my life have exhibited.
I think another great quality of a really excellent leader, and it's one that I really try to emulate, is it's dangerous to fall in love with your own ideas. And you have to be willing to listen to what other people who have experience have to say. That's not to say that your ideas are not right. You may have the best idea in the room, but I'm really careful to not dig my heels in unless it is something that it's the hill I'm ready to die on. And I would say in 26 years, I have dug my heels in on about 3 things. But everyone that worked with me knew that it was a critical path to go the way that I wanted to go. So it's important, I think, especially for women, is you got to pick the hills you want to die on. And the reality is in the workplace, there is usually opportunities for compromise and collectively coming up with the best solution to make everyone feel a part of the team.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, this sort of falling in love with yourself or your ideas or even sort of your own processes and procedures. So I see it a lot, and it's not just women or men, it's everybody. But people who have even been in leadership positions for a while, they think, oh, I know how to be a leader now. Oh, I know how to be a manager now. And they stop looking for those moments where they can sort of have that little bit of self-improvement, or those moments where they can build trust with their team by inviting their team into the discussion.
Absolutely. I agree 100%, Debbie.
Yeah. So Sarah, I also know that you're a very strong advocate for women mentoring other women. So how has this kind of played out for you in your career and made you such a staunch advocate?
Well, I am a strong advocate for women in the workplace. And I'll have to say I have a soft spot, especially for women who have stayed home, raised children, and want to re-enter the workforce. A lot of those women are very nervous because they know there's a large gap in their resume, and they often undervalue the work and the patience and the fortitude that they exhibited being a stay-at-home mother for all those years. And so I really like to help those women in particular transition back into work. And it's on both sides. So as a company leader myself, I always want to make sure that the company's policies empower women while promoting opportunity and fairness in the workplace. That's really in everyone's best interest. And it's equally opportunity for women to continue to strive for leadership roles in both the public and the private sector. And I will have to tell you that I have had the opportunity and the fortunate position over a long period of time to have men and women report to me, men and women come to see me about their careers. And I have had, probably 20 times in my career where a male employee would come in and talk to me about a raise. They wanted a raise and they wanted to tell me why they deserved a raise, and that's great. I don't think I have ever had a woman come in to my office and say, I'd like to talk to you about a raise. As a matter of fact, what I have had happen many times is women who have worked for me will come in for their annual review. They'll sit down. I will give them their review. They're exceeding expectations. I tell them all kinds of fantastic things they're doing. And then I'll say, and and here's your raise. And I can't even tell you how many times different women have said, "Oh, Sarah, that's okay. I'm just so happy to be here." And I immediately say to them, all right, I'm going to take off the company hat for a second and I'm putting on my friend hat. I don't ever want to hear you say that again. And here's why. You are here working, you are producing an excellent work product, and you are providing an increasing corporate value here. And this is not a gift. You have earned this. And that is something that I want your listeners and any women out there who believe that they deserve a raise on Monday to sit down, do the work, be ready to go in and talk to your boss or HR and say, I believe I am underpaid and here is why.
Yeah, and there's a book, I'm going to get the name wrong, but I'm sure our listeners can Google it. It's called Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office, or something of a very similar title. But it talks, and as do other books, talk about this notion that in general, men are much more comfortable going into their boss's office and asking for a raise. And as you're saying, women struggle with this a lot. And yeah, and part of it, I think, is that it's not that they don't feel they're valued, but it's just this notion of, well, if I deserve it, someone will give it to me. And, this book really talks about that is just 100% not true. You may deserve it, but no one's going to give it to you if you're passive. You got to go in and get it. And like you're saying, you can't just walk in and say, hey, boss, I want a raise, right? You've got to put in the legwork. You've got to provide examples. You got to say, hey, I've upped our profits. Hey, I've saved us $20 million, because I caught this error. Hey, I brought in 3 new clients. You've got to have data to back up what you're asking for, but women need to get better in general about having those kinds of conversations.
Absolutely. And the data may be as simple as, I have done some research for my skills in this geographic area of the country, and I'm underpaid 10%. But what you don't want to do is go in and ask for a raise because of some personal situation. I need a new car, so I'd like to talk to you about a raise. That is not the company's responsibility to handle your personal finances. It is the company's responsibility to make sure that you are adequately compensated for your skills and your contribution.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. And like I was saying, I think you got to take the data in with you, right? So I think it's a big mistake to walk into your boss's office and use some kind of an interpersonal issue, or like you're saying, a personal life issue as the basis for your raise. No, it's got to be based in your work, but you got to stand up for yourself. And sometimes, your boss, it's not that they take you for granted, but you're doing this work day in and day out. And sometimes they just don't know all the great things you've done, or they don't keep a catalog of it. So, I would also urge our listeners, when you do great projects or work, or you get a complimentary email, save all that kind of stuff in a folder, because when you have to do your annual performance evaluation or you're asking for a raise, all of that documentation really helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've been telling my team in the last 2 years, now that I have a team of 10, you're your best advocate. I'm not going to know if things are going well or poorly, if there's a problem, unless you kind of flag me down at times. And I fully encourage you to do that. And I think, they've definitely done that. And I think some of them have even done that on this case too, with whether it's they feel they need to be paid more, or whatever resource they might need. But I think that's really, really valuable advice. Thank you for sharing that,
and the
Sarah.
other thing that's very valuable is, and probably even more valuable, is time. And it could be, for instance, that you work for a small company that can't afford to give you a raise, so negotiate something else instead. Say, well, okay, I understand that, but if I run the numbers, that means that I really should only be working 30 hours a week. Or I should be able to leave on Fridays at noon. And actually, I did that at one point. I was asked to take a promotion, and I said I'd be accepting of this additional responsibility, but I have to start leaving at noon on Fridays. I had 2 small children at the time. I was working tremendous number of hours, and I had no time to myself to do grocery shopping, getting to the dry cleaner, stopping to the bank, picking up some more books at the library for the kids. And that's what I negotiated. I said, I need a little bit of time to myself every week. And the company was more than happy to accommodate. So be creative. If you know that your company's in a position that maybe finances are tight, be creative. What do you really want?
For sure. That's really good advice. So Sarah, I want to sort of change discussion here for a minute and talk about your state legislature run. So I know you ran for state legislature a few years ago, and one of your platforms was mental health care. And we're going to be discussing a mental health book on this podcast later this spring, but I was interested to know what you thought were the critical mental health issues facing women today.
Well, I'll have to say I'll really look forward to your episode when you do that on mental health. And I'll have to say I'm just so happy to see that the topic of mental health is making headlines and that people are more encouraged to talk about their experiences and not be ashamed to seek help. And you're right. I ran for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 2014, and improving access to mental health programs and treatment and earlier intervention and earlier education was certainly part of my platform, if not probably the most important part of my platform. And I began to be interested in mental health issues about 5 years ago because our county has 3 specialty courts. They're called treatment courts. One is for drug-related issues, one is for mental health, and then we have a veterans support court. And my mother is one of the judges that runs drug treatment court. And we would talk, and those in charge of the drug treatment court knew and understood that many of the people who appear in their court began using illegal drugs or abusing prescription drugs as a way to self-medicate for an undiagnosed mental illness. So those seeking help from drug treatment court often will have a co-occurring disorder. So they have a mental health issue plus a drug addiction. And so, the conclusion was drawn that at times we're attacking the problem of drug addiction in reverse order and should actually be putting more resources into early detection and early treatment for those behaving in a way that suggests a possible mental illness.
Yeah, and I think for so long, mental illness has been a taboo topic, especially for women. And so women have hesitated to go get treatment or to go to therapy or to sort of seek out help. And so they've been suffering in silence for a long time.
Absolutely. And I think that, all mental illness to a large extent is a female issue, because if it's not you, it's your child or your spouse or your parent. And so, the NIH, National Institute of Health, has concluded that 1 in 4 Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental health disorder. And, that means that the lives of their families and their loved ones are turned upside down as well. And, this is the whole spectrum of mental illness. So it could be, something like a teenager with an eating disorder, or a spouse with depression or anxiety, a returning veteran with post-traumatic stress, a parent with Alzheimer's. And the daily reality is a huge burden for those who suffer and their loved ones, which are often the female in the household. So that's why it became a particularly interesting and important topic to me. And I'll have to say, from the political perspective, I was probably a little early to the scene on this issue. It seems like in the last maybe 2 or 3 years, it's become much more on the forefront of the news, much more part of the platform of candidates. And so I think I might have been a little early to be talking about that at the time. And to some extent was actually encouraged to stay away from the topic. But I will tell you, I knocked on 10,000 doors in my legislative district. And when I would say that is something that I am interested in working on at the state level, I could physically see people change in front of me. Their shoulders would come down. They would want to talk to me. They would want to tell me what was going on in their household. So many people would say to me, "Oh, wow, I'm really glad that you're talking about this. I have a brother who has bipolar disorder, or, my father has Alzheimer's and I'm really struggling and I don't know what to do." And I knew that it was the right thing because I could see the change in the people. And just that so many people are desperate for help because someone they love is suffering, and that makes us suffer.
Yeah, and I think, it's really interesting because I think women do suffer in silence. And,
Oh, yes.
there's definitely no reason, especially in this time period and age where they should be suffering in silence. So I would also encourage our listeners that, if you or someone is suffering from a mental illness, get help or have them, get help. There's nothing to be fearful of, and it's a really good thing to reach out and get that help. So Sarah, I know we want to keep moving along with you because we don't, have too much time to sit. I mean, I know we could talk for hours about mental health issues.
Yes, we could.
So I think we wanted to talk a little bit about your family.
Yeah, Sarah, you've told us about just the great respect you and your husband seem to have for each other and how closely tight-knit you are as a couple. So can you share with us the things that have kept you so close after more than 20 years together?
I'd be happy to. So my husband and I will be celebrating our 24th anniversary this summer, and I'm 47. I was 23 years old when we got married, and he's very kind to me, and I'm so fortunate to have him in my life. And what I think is part of what bonded us so strongly and so early in our marriage is, unfortunately, my husband was diagnosed with cancer when we were quite young, 28. So our children were 4 years old and 2 years old at the time. And the good news here is he's absolutely fine. But it was a really, really tough time. And it very early in our marriage made us focus on the things that really matter and recognize how grateful we are for life and for each other. And so we just have been very fortunate that in 24 years we have been able to focus on the gifts of our marriage and let the other stuff go, because at the end of the day, most of it doesn't matter anyway. Most of the things that people argue about, big picture, and in retrospect, you probably regret fighting about it. So I think to some extent we were very fortunate that very difficult almost 2 years, and frankly, I think really for me probably longer, because I didn't take the time to process it as I was going through it, because it was my responsibility to keep everything together. And so the real hard time for me was actually after we got the all clear, where I suddenly kind of was like, ooh, what all the bad things that could have happened, being a widow at 28 with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and and losing my husband. And so that difficult time really forged this strong relationship. And he is just a very kind person, and I try to really be kind to him, and that I think is a big part of it. But I just like any young married couple, there were certainly things as we got married and we bought a little fixer-upper, and just expectations. We all carry into our relationships expectations from what we saw in our own household, and a lot of those I look back and laugh. A little funny story. It was the first Saturday morning of our marriage that we were in our house together, and I'm kind of watching the clock tick away, and about 3 o'clock I finally said to him, I said, Pete, you gonna clean the bathrooms today? And he said, I'm sorry, what? And I said, well, Dad cleans the bathrooms on Saturdays. So I just thought that that's what was going to happen. Right. So
That's
there's
awesome.
these funny things that we all bring into the marriage. And the other thing is that I realized early on that just because I'm talking doesn't mean I'm necessarily communicating. So, for all of those newlyweds out there or young married couples, and especially I think this is for women, people can't read our minds. And this goes back to Debbie's comment earlier about, I should get a raise at work because people know. Well, they don't know. Nobody can read your mind. And I remember saying things early in our marriage to my husband, like, we'd get up from dinner and I'd say, do you mind doing the dishes? And he'd say, sure. Right? So that was the whole conversation. I talked, he responded, great. So here's what I was really saying in my mind. Pete, the minute we stand up, I'd like you to start loading the dishwasher, finish the hand washing, and wipe down the countertops. And conversely, what he heard was, hey, sometime in the next couple of days, do you mind straightening up a little bit in here, right? So I think in terms of a strong marriage, we learned early on effective communication, not just talking, right? Because that was talking. Could you clean up the kitchen? What's effective communication? Like really hear what my expectations are. And then he would be able to respond and say, actually, you know what? No, I'm not going to clean up the kitchen right now because the Villanova basketball game's on in 10 minutes. Oh, okay. And then, do you mind doing it after? Yeah, great. So I think for, young married couples out there that are kind of like, how do you figure all this out? Especially for the women, he can't read your mind. So you got
Sarah, I have to know, who cleans the bathrooms now?
Most of the time I do, but
and on what day?
Anytime it needs.
Oh man. So I'm really curious, what are, my husband and I've been married for 10 years now, and in the business of life, it's very important that we find time to spend with each other and only each other, especially now that we have a 3-year-old. So what is some of your favorite activities, dates, or hobbies to do with just your husband?
Oh, absolutely. I do think that's really important for your marriage is what is good for your children is to see that their parents are happy and love each other. So you couples out there with young children, get a babysitter or call your mother or call your father and go do something. So the nice thing is we do share a lot of interests. We like to hike, we like to camp, we like to shoot. And we do have interests that we do separately. So my husband's a runner. I basically hate running, but sometimes we'll go to a trail and he'll run and I'll listen to a podcast and walk, for instance. And then we meet up and go do something else. But yeah, we definitely have activities that we really enjoy doing together. And we both really enjoy trap shooting. So we do that. We try to do that at least once a week, weather depending and schedules depending. But those are the types of activities we like to do. And, the other thing for the listeners is my husband and I are essentially empty nesters now. So, I do believe you can have it all, but not necessarily all at the same time. So that's what.
That is good. That's good for me to hear.
Yeah.
But I think that's true, for parents or for, people wanting that work-life balance. And we've talked about that a little on the podcast before, but you can't have it all at the same time all the time.
No, you just can't. And the days are long, but the years are short. These are when you have small children and you're in the thick of it and the diapers and the ear infections and stuff, you just feel like I'm never going to break out of this. And then when you do, and your children like mine are 22 and 20 years old, you look at pictures of them as little children and you think, what? Was that not yesterday? It really is. And I know as a young parent, it's hard to hear it because you're like, yeah, great. I have a child with a fever, so I can't really see the end to this. But it really does go quickly. And like I said, you can have it all, just not all at the same time. There's a season for everything. I do a lot of volunteering, but I didn't when the children were little. I was working full time, and I was also a full time mom. So you got to pace yourself. It's a marathon and not a sprint, and be kind to yourself along the way.
Well, and it sounds like you're able to enjoy each moment, which is something that can really slow time down enough that you engage effectively and meaningfully with the family that lives with you. And so that's really something I've felt and learned in the last years since Ethan came along, that it's really important to kind of savor each of those really special moments. And I can't believe Ethan is already, I'm not kidding, well, I am only 5'2", but over half my height now, and he's 3.5. So it is going by quickly.
Absolutely.
But
and the other thing I would recommend to the listeners is, remember, it's not just about the time that you spend with them. If you're looking for work-life balance and you have small children and, okay, well, I need to spend a certain amount of time. It's really more about the attention. So you can be together for 2 hours, but if you're on Twitter and Facebook and your child is, watching television, that is not the type of work-life balance I would suggest you should strive for. You're better off spending 30 minutes walking around the block, looking at things on the sidewalk, poking at worms, looking for tadpoles in the creek, going to the park. that is a much better use of time and effective work-life balance.
Absolutely. I think being active is so important, and for lots of reasons, but it keeps an active mind, and it's much more engaging for everybody involved. So I want to switch gears a little bit now, because I'm very intrigued by your passion for helping veterans, and I want to learn more about how you volunteer for what your volunteer work is with regard to veterans. Can you tell us all
I'd
about
be
that?
happy to. So I had mentioned my father was in the Marine Corps, and so I serve on the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation for Philadelphia. I kind of feel like, there, but for the grace of God go I. That is a charitable organization that raises money for children to go to school who are the children of injured or are fallen Marines. And it's a fantastic organization, and I'm very proud to be a part of that. And the other organization that I work with a lot is the Greater Philadelphia Veterans Network. And so this taps into a different set of my skills, which is more my professional skills and my professional network in the Philadelphia area. So I've lived here a long time and have been fortunate enough to develop a nice professional network. And what they call it GPVN, Greater Philadelphia Veterans Network, does is helps transitioning veterans from active duty into the civilian world. We help them network. We help them with resume review. We do mock interviews. And then once a year, we do a fantastic program that is Veterans Shark Tank. So this is to encourage veterans who are also entrepreneurs, present their businesses to a professional set of judges. It's very much like the television show Shark Tank, and they have prizes, but it's also a way for them to show their talents to the professional community. And they've been very successful. Some of them have gone on to have very successful businesses, and it's really fun. So that taps into my patriotic sense of duty of giving back to those who have served our country, but also tapping into my business skills. And so it's kind of right in my wheelhouse, and it's a wonderful organization.
That is great. Wow. Well, as you know, on this podcast, we discuss how regular women become Athenas by working hard, persevering through the challenges in their lives, and contributing to a better world. So we'd like to ask you a few quick response questions, and you don't have to speak quickly, but you can.
I'm going to time them. I'm going to time how long it takes to answer that. So here we go.
But I've got about 5 questions, so we'll just try to work through these. So what is something that you are currently working hard at?
Oh boy, currently working hard at. That is a great question. Well, during this Lenten season, there's always something that I'm trying to improve about myself. And so the problem that I have recently been struggling with is, listening to a lot of advice about there are things in our control and there are things that are not in our control. Things in our control, all the obvious things in life, the daily tasks that we can get done. Things not in our control, the weather. Okay, great. The reality is I have come to realize there's actually a third. There are things that are not in my control, but they're in someone else's control. And I have I wouldn't call it a terrible habit, but I definitely have the habit of being a fixer. And so when I see something that is not optimized or is inconveniencing customers or other people, I find that I am so ready to jump in and fix the situation no matter what it is. And I'll give you a perfect example. So I went to the movies with my husband the other night, and I actually had just finished reading some Stoic philosophy. I'm like, all right, there's things you can control, can't control. This is good. Let's stay calm. Good mental health. We go to the movies, and it's one of those huge movie theaters. There's 16 shows going on. There's a huge line to get in to take tickets. And I'm standing in the line, and I'm observing what's going on. And I see there's one ticket taker. He's got to walk across an aisle every time somebody needs glasses, like 3D glasses. And I said to my husband, I'm like, I can hardly stand this because I want to go up there. I want to say, okay, who's the manager? Let's get a second ticket taker. If you need glasses, everyone to the left, anyone who's going to theaters 1 through 4 to the right. And that is something I'm working on because
That's so funny that you say that, Sarah, because I'm laughing because I'm also a fixer, and I like to be able to just fix whatever the problem is, and I can't stand not being able to control that.
yes, but it can drive other people crazy. And
Of
so
course.
that is something I'm definitely working on, just to be a little bit more calm and recognize that not everything needs to be optimized. But that's something that I'm definitely working on. And the other thing that I'm frankly working on is just being a little bit nicer to myself. And I'll give you a good example. Like, I'm always like, why can't I lose these last 5 pounds? And I had a friend say to me recently, she said, Sarah, do you think people are going to come to your funeral one day and say, oh, she was a great wife and mother and a wonderful friend, but it's really too bad she couldn't lose those last 5 pounds. And I was like,
That's a good point.
I said to my friend, I said, you know what, that's a great point. And there's a balance in life, right? It's important to be disciplined so that you are on a path to success and you know where you're going. But it's also good to occasionally stop and be kind to yourself and recognize that we're all on a journey and none of us are perfect and that we can just do our best every day.
That's excellent. So, how would you like to contribute to a better world?
Well, at the end of the day, I think it's my obligation to just kind of leave behind a portfolio of good work. And, what I mean by that is that I've created a family that loves and supports each other. And, the reality is I'm going to be gone one day. And the fact that my children like and love one another and that I know that they'll be there for each other when hard times come, because the hard times come sometimes, it could be financial, it can be a physical challenge. And so that's really important to me, that I've created a family that loves each other and is there for each other, and that the volunteer organizations I've helped are in a better place because of my involvement, and that professionally I'm respected as a good leader. And I think just boiling it down, that it's pretty simple. I try to leave everything better than I found it, and I just try to bloom where I'm planted.
That is, yeah, very noble, and I think it speaks to being productive and contributing. Like it's kind of focusing on that contributing and not just taking from the world.
Absolutely. It's servant leadership. It's making sure that you're out there serving others and recognizing that other people have needs and doing your best to help them achieve their goals.
So we're always looking for more women than their stories to share, modern Athenas. And who is a modern Athena that you think we should know about?
Well, I think there are modern Athenas everywhere, but one that I would like to hear more about, and I would certainly nominate as a guest for your podcast, is retired Brigadier General Carol Eggert. And Carol is the head of the military and veteran affairs at Comcast and NBC Universal here in Philadelphia. And that organization is just doing such a fantastic job of promoting and supporting both military charities and hiring veterans themselves and encouraging others to hire veterans. And I know Carol professionally, but I'm sure with her experience in the Army, and like I said, she's a retired brigadier general, she would probably have a lot of fantastic things to share with you and your listeners.
I like what you said about they're everywhere, and it's even just these discussions we've had in these podcasts has opened my eyes to seeing the achievements of everyone around me and the ways, and keeping an open mind as to the ways that everyone can really contribute to a better world. That was really fantastic to hear. So do you have any favorite books that you'd recommend for us?
Absolutely. I love to read, and I think it's a great opportunity for anyone to expand their mind. And I will give you just a couple of my very favorite books. The number one that I always recommend, and this is great if you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company or if you're the CEO of your household, and that's The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. I think that is a time-tested, fantastic book. It's as I said, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. It's 21 chapters. You could literally just pick it up and go to chapter 7 and read chapter 7 and learn something. So that's a great book. I encourage everyone to get that. You might even want to get 2 copies to share with a friend. Then Essentialism, The Disciplined Art of Less, which is also a great book. And that focuses on making sure you're doing the right things. Another great book, which is not a business book, is called The 5 Love Languages. That's a really interesting book, especially for people who are working on their relationships with their spouses or their children or family members, friends. And what I love about that is you quickly identify what your love language is and what the other person's love language is, because you may find that there's a disconnect. So for instance, the 5 are words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. And I look at that and I say, oh, I know the way I like to receive love is acts of service. So for instance, for my birthday, don't bother buying me a gift. I don't need any gifts. But you know what? If you got the oil changed in my car, that would be super. So it's a really great way of matching up the way you like to receive love and also the way the other person does. So for instance, if I like to receive love as acts of service and I always give it to my husband in that way, but he really prefers receiving gifts and I never give him a gift, he doesn't feel loved in the way he likes to be loved. So that is a great book. I strongly recommend that. And then last...
Oh, Sarah, I'm just going to jump in on you right here because I think one of the books that all 3 of us could agree is a really good book is called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. For our listeners who don't know Sarah and Sonia and my backstory, we all met because of this book. So that's how we've all gotten to know each other.
That's absolutely right. And that was 4th on my list because I would absolutely be remiss not to recommend the book that brought the 3 of us together. So yes, I would absolutely recommend Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. It's a fantastic book on leadership and lessons learned and certainly something that anybody can apply to their lives.
Yeah, and I would also say, for people who are like, oh, I can't read another leadership book, Extreme Ownership has very tangible advice that everybody can apply immediately to their lives. It's not sort of this theoretical leadership or talking about transformational leadership or maybe someday you can do something. No, it's very tangible, and you can walk away from reading 1 chapter or 5 chapters and have 10 different things that you can immediately implement to make your life better.
Absolutely. And the other thing is you may find, like I had a situation at work last week that required there's a chapter on cover and move. And I was thinking about the situation at work and I read the book, a year or more ago, and I picked up and I reread that chapter just to kind of reframe my thinking about the cover and move approach to get something done at work. So it's a fantastic book to read. It's a fantastic reference book. And I know that the 3 of us couldn't recommend it any higher.
Yeah. And so, on that note, we're going to end our time here with Sarah today. And we'd really like to thank Sarah for joining us and being our first guest. And thanks to all of you for listening and downloading and continuing to share our experience on Modern Athenas with us. If you'd like to connect with us, we have our website at modernathenas.com, our Facebook page, our Twitter account at Modern Athenas, and our Instagram account at the Modern Athenas Podcast. We also have a YouTube channel, so you can listen to the podcast there or on iTunes, on Stitcher, or on Google Play. Our next podcast episode will be talking about a book entitled Runner by Lizzie Hawker. As we leave you today, we want to remind you to never forget that each of you, like each of the Modern Athenas we've been discussing, has the power and capacity to be a changemaker in your own world. Work hard, dream big, and reach for the stars.